It's great to see you guys. My name is Lance. I'm one of the pastors here at Timberlake. I think you picked a great weekend to be here. If you're brand new, here's the good news for you. Here's the good news. Next week's going to be even better. Jared's going to be back. It's going to be even better next week. So I'm so glad you're here. And we're working through a series called Bumper Sticker Theology. It's just a collection of talks. And really the goal for this series is phrases that sound really good on paper. They sometimes even rhyme. They're really trite. They're portable. They're quick. And they're rooted in some sort of truth. They're rooted in good feelings or good principles. They're rooted in hopeful ambition. They're things that we want to believe are true about God or the way things work in the world, but they don't always play out that well. That sometimes they work in certain situations, but if you a broad brush apply them to a lot of different situations, they start to fall apart. They start to not work as well as you'd want them to. And we don't have this just in church world. We have this in a lot of different categories of our life. We have a lot of phrases that we like to use that aren't always accurate. One of my favorite ones that you've heard before is the customer's always right. Have you heard that one before? And if you've ever worked with a customer before, you know they are not always right. That many times customers can be wrong and stubborn and foolish, and you just want to say it all. But we get the spirit of it. The spirit of it is good hospitality and good customer service, but the customer's not always right. You know that to be true. Another one of my favorites is this: follow your passion and the money will follow. Follow your passion and the money will follow. And there's a lot of people with theater degrees that would beg to differ, you know? There's a lot of people with a really niche liberal arts degree that they're like, I just thought the money would follow. And I'm like, I'm so sorry, there isn't a lot of money in medieval literature, but we're hoping for a big change in that. We're hoping that works out for you. The last one, this one I hear all the time at weddings. This is like a really good wedding advice, or when people are giving JV couples therapy. This is my favorite one. It usually comes from like a father figure, maybe a father-in-law, maybe a kind uncle. And they always say this: remember, she is always right. She's always right. Just remember, she's always right. And that one usually doesn't get as much of a laugh because most of the women are like, yeah, that is not false. That is not wrong. I'm always right. And these happen in culture, but they also happen in church. And we've had a bunch of different ones of these that we've gone through over the past few weeks. And today I want to talk about one that oftentimes I hear in some of the hardest situations for people. I hear it with the best intentions, and I hear it when people are really trying to be caring and thoughtful. And it works sometimes, but if you start to apply this in a big way, as you'll see today, it starts to fall apart. And it cheapens our faith to a version that I don't want for you and I wouldn't want for me. And it's simply this phrase: let go and let God. Why don't you just let go and let God? Just let go and let God. Couldn't you see this cross-stitched on like something beautiful that you'd get at Hobby Lobby? Couldn't you see this on a pillow of some sort? Maybe some of you have this at home, and if you do, I mean, it's great. Maybe it's time to take it down, but it's great for you. And let go and let God is just this beautiful principle. And I'll tell you this. You hear this the most for people who are really feeling hopeless, who have no other options left. And in that very specific situation, I get the principle. I get the heart. It's like the customer's always right. I understand what you're trying to communicate. But my fear and my worry is that if we let this go, if we leave it unchecked, if we start to apply this to how we view God in general, my guess is we're going to get to a place where we feel pretty disappointed. We feel pretty frustrated with God, because could you imagine, like, look through the Bible even, it starts to fall apart pretty quickly. Think about Noah and the ark, right? Even if you're not familiar with church, you might be familiar with some of these stories. Noah, God calls him and says, I'm going to flood the earth and I want you to build an ark. Could you imagine if Noah says, well, actually, I'm going to let go and let you build it? That's not how the story ends. There's just it wouldn't be a story. Could you imagine David and Goliath? David, the small shepherd boy, called up to face Goliath. All the armies behind him. There's a silence. There's a roar from the crowd. David comes forward with a sling, sets it down, and says, let go and let God. And that's the end of David. That's the end of his story. That's it. It took some participation. We see this throughout the Bible. We see this in Jesus' ministry. The fact that Jesus didn't come on the scene, give one good message, let go and let God and hope this works out. No, he worked. We went to places that were uncomfortable and inconvenient. He took his disciples into things that they didn't feel prepared for, but he took them there anyway. He navigated into situations that you and I wouldn't necessarily love, but he did it regardless because the philosophy of let go and let God starts to fall apart. And I'll warn you of this, and maybe you've already experienced this. If let go and let God is the primary filter of the way that you experience your faith, you are on a fast track for disappointment. You're on a fast track to be so frustrated with the things that you think God is telling you or you think that God has promised you. Because what happens when you let go and God doesn't? What happens when you let go? What happens when you turn on full blast, Carrie Underwood, Jesus, take the wheel? And then everyone in your life says, maybe it's time to retake your wheel. Like maybe you've just let go of the wheel for too long. We all know those people, right? Who have let go of the wheel of their life and you're thinking, it might be time to grab a hold. You're kind of gone off track. You've hit the guardrails. You've gone over the guardrails and into something you shouldn't be. And I get the heart. I understand what Carrie's trying to sing. I don't think a worship team would crush it. How good are they? Man, I think they would crush Jesus, take the wheel. Maybe during baptisms we're going to sing it. It's going to be beautiful. But I think there's this beautiful truth for all of us to take hold of, that there's this messy tension. There's this messy, frustrating tension between trusting God and personal accountability. There's this messy middle gray area in our faith between trusting God, which he does call us to do, and personal accountability. Because at some point, if we start to mistrust in promises that were never extended to us, we're guaranteed to be disappointed. It makes me think of an experience I had when I first started in ministry. I worked with students, high school and middle school students. It was a ton of fun. There's so much energy, so little deodorant. It was awesome. It was like such exciting. And one of my favorite moments every year was when I got to do summer camps. Not only with our church, we got to do summer camps, but I got the opportunity to go and teach at different summer camps to students. And it was some of my favorite moments where you just see the next generation and think, man, we are onto something great as a church. It is so cool to see. And I remember being young, and at one of the services, the worship teams, they just go. They have so much energy at these student camps. They're jumping around. They're singing. It's so fun. I remember one guy was in his mid-20s. He's singing. He's having so much fun. And I'm sitting right here. I'm standing right here in the front row and surrounded by a bunch of middle school students. And he makes this gesture that seemed like a universal gesture, but I must have misunderstood. He gives me one of these. Like he's going to stage dive. And I thought to myself, there's no way he's going to try and stage dive. Because when someone tries to stage dive, what's the first thing that you do? You become immediately aware of your surroundings. And I realized that I'm surrounded by what must have been third graders. They were about this tall, maybe on their tiptoes with their arms up, all of them about 14 pounds combined. And I'm looking at this guy and I'm like, no, that's not the move right now. That's not what you want to do. And he goes, yeah, and I'm like, no. I'm like flagging him away. Like, don't, this is not the move, not the time. And I knew it was happening when he took 2 steps back. And I'm thinking, he's about to get a running start. He's about to do this. And he takes a running start. And of course, there's this beautiful survival instinct in all these students, so they flee. And it's just me, and I'm stuck. And I take this guy down. I take him down to the seats with me. We tumble over seats. Of course, he's having the greatest time of his life. He bounces back up and charges back up on the stage. My back's sore. I'm blindsided. I'm thinking, what just happened? And I know it sounds silly and confusing, but some of you in your trusting, beautiful naivety look to God and you think, hey, are we doing this? And you jump and he's like, that's not a promise I made. What are you? You're jumping into something that I never promised you. And I hate to start a message this way. I promise it'll get hopeful at the end. I promise. But if you're here and you're either curious about what it means to follow Jesus or you're trying your hardest to follow him like we are, and you're saying, you know what, I want to follow Jesus, I'm just going to warn you, he never promised that life would be perfect. He never promised you that you'd never have heartache. He never promised you that relationships would work out perfect. He never promised you you'd have great friends. He never promised you a great job. He never promised you financial security. Never promised any of that. And so when we choose in our own really trusting way to say, God, I'm just going to let go and let you figure it out. I think we set ourselves up for a level of disappointment as we have to navigate. Where am I personally accountable? And where can I trust God? Because he sure invites us to trust him. He really does. And how do we navigate the middle? And here's what I know. There's a few different categories of people and a few different seasons, but for each of us, one comes a little bit easier. For some of you, personal accountability, you know that. For some of you, man, trusting comes way easier. And it's in a few different ways. I wrote them down this way for you guys. That we lean towards trust or accountability based on, first, our natural temperament. It's our natural temperament. It's the thing that you and I are kind of wired towards naturally. Some of you are personal accountability people, and you know who you are. You're the people who've decided your life mantra is, if I don't do it, it won't get done, right? You're convinced that if you don't vacuum your house, you will live in squalor because no one else will. You're convinced that if you don't clean the bathrooms, you just as a social experiment tried once and you let it go for a little while and you're wondering, does no one else see that? Does no one else see what's growing? Does no one else see what's happening here? Does no one else see that it's overtaking? And then you couldn't take it anymore, and so you came in and you were bitter at everybody, but you cleaned it and you snarled about it and it was awesome. You're the people who think, man, if I don't do it, nobody's going to do it. And then there's the other side of you're the overly trusting people. Your mantra is, it'll all work out in the end. It's all going to work out in the end. Like, it'll figure itself out. It'll figure itself out. But at the end of the day, you do need to pay your taxes, okay? Like, you need to, it won't just figure itself out. We're worried about you, okay? The people who say it'll just all figure itself out. You're very trusting, or for some of you, you're very controlling. It's just the way that you are wired, and God invites us somewhere in the middle. The next one is this. It's the season of life that you're in. It's a season of life when you know things are going well, it is easy to do things on your own because you've figured it out. You start to think to yourself, man, I've got things put together. My job's going pretty well. My relationships are going all right. I'm financially secure. I did a little vacation to Chelan. Everything's feeling pretty good in my life right now. I'm just going to keep control because I'm doing pretty good when I'm controlling things. And then there's the other side, and maybe you've been there before, where you've tried it all, where you've worked it all, where you've strategized and planned and nothing is working. And isn't it true in the moment where you've tried it all, it becomes a lot easier to trust God because you have no other option? Like, you've tried it all. You got the diagnosis you never thought you would get. And you looked around, you tried all the doctors, you went to all the specialists, you started eating kale, and nothing worked. And so you thought to yourself, maybe I'm going to try church. Maybe I'm going to try where I have to just trust God because I just can't figure it out. Maybe you've been in a place where you've been bitter and frustrated, where the relationship just isn't working, where you guys just can't get on the same page. You're frustrated every time they say something or I say something. We miscommunicate. It doesn't work. We've tried the therapists. We've read the books. We've listened to the podcasts, and it just isn't working. And so I don't know what to do other than trust God. And maybe he has something in the midst of it. I don't know what season of life you may find yourself in, but I'm going to tell you, it makes it easier one way or another. The last one is this, just your personal theology. It's the way that you view God. And that comes through a number of different things. It might be in the faith tradition you grew up in, the type of church, the way you were raised, the way you assume God works, the experiences that you've had where you start to think to yourself, how can I trust the God who would let this happen to me? How could I trust the God who would let my grandmother pass away? How can I trust the God who didn't heal, who didn't step in? How can I trust the God who says he's good in all perfect things, but allowed this? How can I let that happen? And so your theology, the way you view God, starts to really dictate whether or not you can trust him. And you think to yourself, no, I have to take personal accountability because God can't be trusted. And maybe today we can start to open up our view a little bit and see a God who can be trusted. Then maybe we don't just let go and abdicate everything to him, but we find this messy balance in the middle. And if you're looking for a perfect formula, I'll warn you, today won't be it. But maybe we can get a little more understanding of how to meet in the middle. And one of the ways I think we do this is through a parable that Jesus taught. It's a story, it's a fictional story meant to tell a really personal truth. And it comes in the middle of a part of the Bible that if you're familiar with church, you've probably actually heard this story before. In fact, if you're here and you have no Bible background and you're thinking, man, this is going to be a part that it gets confusing, you've actually probably heard a rumor of this story. This is the story where we get the phrase Good Samaritan from. Good Samaritan. Fun fact, it actually comes from the Bible. And Jesus is having this conversation with a religious leader of the time. And the religious leader comes to him and says, hey, what's the most important command? Of all the things that we're told to do in the Bible, the homework we have to do and rules to keep, what's the most important thing that we can do? And Jesus looks at him and he gives him two answers wrapped into one. He said, the first thing you can do is love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. That's the really important thing that you should do. And the second one is like it. He said, he tied them together. He says to love your neighbor as yourself, to love other people. Which is this interesting way of saying our faith is not just an academic or intellectual pursuit between me and an invisible God. It's not just me and God working it out in isolation on my own in this very thoughtful way. It's not just Bible verses and reading. It's more than that. It plays out in the way that we interact with other people. And the religious leader trying to find a loophole, because isn't it true anytime you get a rule you don't like, you find a loophole? Isn't that true? It's like when my kids ask me if they can have dessert in the middle of dinner. And I say, you got to finish your dinner. And they ask the same thing that your kids ask. Well, how many bites do I have to take? How much dinner do I have to eat? In the same way, the religious leader looks at Jesus and says, well, define neighbor. Define who neighbor is. Because there's some people, come on, they are unlovable by their own accord, okay? And Jesus tells this story. This is the story Jesus tells. I think we can learn a lot from. It's in Luke chapter 10. It says this. In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, about 18 miles, a full day walk. And when he got attacked by robbers in the middle of his journey, they stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and then went away, leaving him half dead and naked on the side of the road, very vulnerable. A priest, a religious leader, this is the top of the top. I mean, this is a very educated person in their relationship with God. They did this professionally. Happened to go down the same road. And when they saw the man, not only did he not help him, he passed to the other side of the road to get a little space from him. So too, a Levite, which is also a religious person at the time, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed on the other side as well. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was. We'll pause the story there. A Samaritan, we just read through that. We just think of it as any other title. This is a person who, at the time, everyone would cringe a little bit. This is the type of person you don't get along with. Think about the person who votes different than you. Think about the person who stands for things that you have no idea how a human being could stand for. That person, whichever side you land on, that person walks by as well. He passed by on the other side. The Samaritan, he traveled, and he saw the man. When he saw him, he took pity on him. He walked over to him. He knelt down, and he said, let go and let God. I'm just kidding. He didn't say that. Could you imagine? That'd be a horrible end of the story, right? Let go and let God. And then he moved on. Guy's naked, half dead. Could you? What? That'd be a horrible story. No, he didn't say that. He went to him. He bandaged his wounds. He poured oil and wine on it. Then he put the man on his own donkey. He brought him to an inn, and he took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii, which is 2 days' wages, and he gave it to the innkeeper. He said, look after him. And when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense that you may have. At this point, this is the same response that you and I would have. The crowd's devastated. They're disappointed. They're frustrated. This is the same way when I tell my kids, you just have to eat till you're full. And they're like, what? Come on, there's no loophole there. There's no way to work around this. This is frustratingly clear and poignant message of how we're supposed to approach our faith. And so everybody groans and is frustrated, thinking, Samaritans, oh no, what? Come on, even them, like that just requires so much. And this is what Jesus says, just to really drive it home. This is tough. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And the expert replied, grumbled, frustrated, bitter, that ugly face. He replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, let go and let God. I'm just kidding. It's the same dumb joke twice. How awesome is that? No, Jesus told him, go and do likewise. Go and do likewise. In the English language, these are called imperative verbs. These are calls to action or commands, and Jesus was full of them. Isn't that frustrating that Jesus, at the end of all of his messages, didn't just say like, go pray about it. Go think about it. Just send out good vibes into the world. It'll all work out in the end. He uses these imperative verbs. Go and do likewise. Which, again, frustratingly leaves very little margin for you and I to figure out anything else. It leaves us very little room to go for things like let go and let God. John Maxwell was this incredible, still is today, he's still alive, he's not was yet, is this incredible leadership guru and thinker. If you're in business world, I guarantee you've read one of John Maxwell's books. He was he was kind of the first person in the realm of leadership coaching and authorship. And he has a ton of books that are incredibly insightful. And fun fact about John Maxwell, he was actually a pastor before he transitioned into the leadership space. And he has this quote. He says it in a lot of different ways in a lot of different books, but this principle that he teaches that I think is so insightful. And it says this, focus your time and energy on what only you can do. Focus your time and energy on what only you can do. And for leaders, this is gold. This is gold. Don't get in the weeds of everything. Come on, you have to focus your energy on only what you can do. And I've taught this from a biblical perspective a number of different times. It's actually a really good talk. It's a talk for a different day, but it's a really good talk. It's a talk that goes something like, hey, for parents in the room, your kids only get one mom and one dad, and that's you. So do what only you can do. Hey, for husbands and wives in here, ideally, you only get one husband and wife. So do what only you can do in a relationship. It's kind of a good talk, right? I mean, that's pretty good. One person gave me a nod. That's awesome. A tough crowd. But it's true. I mean, it's just beautiful points. It's a really powerful challenge. And because I know you guys, you're sharp and you're leaders and God's gifted you in specific ways. And some of my favorite talks are to get up here and say, God has given you a specific gift to do a specific thing for such a time as this. And it's a really cool talk. And everyone fires up and you find your lane, you stick to your lane, you see things outside of your lane, you think, that's not for me. And as leaders do, you abdicate and you delegate things away that are not in your power alley. And Jesus, frustratingly enough, I mean, this seems so counterintuitive, but he gives us a lot of opportunity to do things that anyone could do. Like, anybody can do a lot of the things that Jesus presents to his followers, that they're not just unique, that, listen, you have a lot of neighbors. So any one of your neighbors could be a good neighbor. And these religious leaders, I hesitate to think they're just horrible people who are nasty and awful. But they knew their lane. And they thought to themselves, why would I do that when someone else could? And Jesus is calling for each and every one of us who have maybe delegated away some responsibilities, this is me included, who feel like, that's not my lane anymore. To simply ask a question I don't even like asking. It's not powerful, it's not visionary, but it's so challenging. It's simply this question. When is the last time you chose to do a thing that anyone could do? When's the last time you chose to do a thing that anyone could do? And I love these people in church. You want to be honest? These are the people that bring our faith to life. The people who choose to do what anyone could do. Any number of you could be over there right now serving with your hellion kids. They could be doing it. I saw some of them walk in. They look like troublemakers, okay? Any one of you could be standing outside in the parking lot, making this feel like a welcoming and warm place to be as people come in, offering a smile and a handshake. Any one of us can do it, but we think, I got a lane, and I got a gift, and I got a thing. And not any one of you can sing. Don't do that. Let's leave that to only certain people. But I'm just challenging you. I wonder if there's a space where you could step in, because here's what's going to happen. I know it happens. It's not going to surprise me anymore. It's not going to surprise you anymore. It happens every single year in the same rhythm and cadence. School is going to start. People are going to come back from their dreamy vacations to Hawaii and Chelan, all the ones that we see all over social media and get all bitter about. Yeah, me too. They're going to come back. They're going to get back in routine. They're going to get back into things. School's going to get back in session. And I'm telling you, there's going to be people in this community who think to themselves, you know what? We're not really a church family, but I think right now we need it. Hey, we're not really like church people. This isn't a church thing. I never grew up with this. I hope it's not a cult. But, I saw this mailer and this thing that's happening in Duval, and they're doing Mario Weekend or a Seahawks thing or some little geode crystal guy, and our kid likes geodes. So maybe we just go and we check it out. And there are people who are going to come curious about what faith could look like. And weirdly enough, you and I are the representation they're going to get. You and I are the people who have to answer the question, am I willing to do what really anyone could do? Am I willing to do the things that aren't glamorous, that aren't exciting, but make a huge difference in the kingdom of God? James, the brother of Jesus, had these really indicting, I honestly, this next part I'm about to tell you, I wish wasn't in the Bible because I would just be able to avoid it. But it is, so if you're going to get frustrated or offended, you take it up with the Bible, okay? Take it up with James. He's the brother of Jesus. Could you imagine being the brother of Jesus? That's crazy. James says this in James chapter 2. What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but don't show it by your actions? Can that kind of faith save anyone? Suppose, he tells this story, kind of like Jesus. You learned this from Jesus maybe. Suppose you see a brother or sister who has no food or clothing, and you say to them, goodbye, and have a good day. Stay warm and eat well. Not only are you a condescending prick, I mean, like, what is that? But you don't give that person any food or clothing? What good does that do? What good do the words do if you don't do anything with it? And then this next part, this is twist the knife. And again, take it up with the Bible. So you see, faith by itself isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it's dead and, harsh word, useless. Useless. It is without function, without practicality. And now, this is where people get up in arms. This is not a salvation conversation. All you need to do to have faith is place your hope, faith, and trust in Jesus Christ, the fact that he rose from the dead. And we're going to celebrate that in a few moments and a few people who've decided to do that. That is one category all by itself. But I think we get caught up in saying, yay, that gets me into heaven one day. I think what Jesus invites us to is to get experience and taste of heaven today in the way that we interact with people, in the way that we experience one another, in the way that God designed it in this beautiful way. And it's when our faith takes action that we start to experience some of that our life starts to change, that something bubbles up inside of us that we didn't know was there. Because if you fell asleep and you catch nothing else, catch this. This is the one thing I want you to walk away with. Something happens in you when you aren't doing things for you. I don't know how to describe it. And maybe if you've tried it before, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, it is better than crack. And I've never tried crack, so it might be good. But I suspect it's better than any kind of drug. Something happens in you when you're not doing things for you. It's just this beautiful way that God has wired you and I to start to navigate our life. And it's so much better than let go and let God. It's so much better than God will figure it out. It's so much more practical, which is on one hand exciting and on one hand really challenging. Because if you're like me, you're going to spend the rest of your life somewhere in the middle of this hazy medium between trusting God and personal accountability. And I'm going to be honest, I don't have it figured out yet, and I don't always do great with it. But I would just ask, would you join me? Maybe loving God and loving your neighbor is a good place to start. Maybe Jesus was onto something. But I'm naive enough to believe this. This is crazy, but I'm naive enough to believe, other than me giving you this big list of all the things that you can do to make it practical when you go home, I'm naive enough to believe that if you just were vulnerable enough to pray for a moment and say, God, show me the areas where I can take personal accountability of my faith. Show me the areas where I can show up. That in this still small voice, that oftentimes for me isn't a booming echo of God's deep, ominous voice, but it's a still small voice inside of me that says things that are smarter than I am. And some of you might call that a conscience or something else, but I believe it's God's Spirit. And he would whisper to me, maybe just moments, and then the courage to actually follow through and do it. If you're open to that idea, maybe you could experience a richer faith than you even knew was possible. And I don't want to leave hanging a group of people we addressed in the beginning. In the very beginning, I talked about the group of people who let go and let God was originally designed for. In its purest, simplest form, it's the people who, are hopeless, who feel like they don't have anywhere else to turn. They've tried it all on their own, and they're looking for God to step in a real way. I just want to reassure you that God does not leave you there And it's not all about what you can achieve on your own, that actually in that posture of humility, God steps in. And Jesus says, this one short passage that I've gone to in some of the darkest moments of my life, and it's been an encouragement to me, and maybe it could be an encouragement to you as well. Whether you need it today, or you need to save it for a moment that's coming, let's really ruminate on this for a second, what Jesus says. And I'll warn you, it does require some participation. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. It's this beautiful dance between come, take, and learn, and in response, you'll get rest. So come, take, learn. It's actions. Remember those pesky little imperative verbs again. And in return, you'll get the sense of rest and peace you didn't even know was possible. It's this beautiful mix between letting go of your own ambition and taking hold of what God has for you. And when you do that, I'm telling you, you experience a sense of faith that's far richer than let go and let God. It's far deeper, far more poignant, far more powerful, and more practical. Never know. It could even change your life. It could even change your relationships. It could change your mental health. It could change the way that you see the world. And I'm telling you, that's worth going for.